Every single year, the same thing happens. There's always the same type of player that pops up in the pre-draft process. The same type of guy that dominates draft discussions from the time leading up to it and is usually labeled the bizarro of their class. This player is the draft riser. We all know a guy like this. The player who randomly skyrockets up the board and pushes himself into top 15, top 10, or even top 5 convo. Whether it's because they had a great final season or turned heads at the combine, these players grasp the attention of the world pre-draft, especially if they're a quarterback. Guys like Anthony Richardson in last year's draft, and more infamously, Zach Wilson in 2021. This year's no exception, not by a long shot. JJ McCarthy, prior to being picked, had been zooming up draft boards, but that, compared with his perception, makes him the weirdest quarterback prospect I have ever seen. All these guys I mentioned before, AR-15, Zach Wilson, draft stocks, boomed for one reason or another. Anthony Richardson had an absurd combine outing, shattering virtually every feasible quarterback record. Zach Wilson broke out in his final season at BYU, posting objectively and easily his best numbers in his collegiate career. He also had an awesome pro day, and basically had the Jets foaming at the mouth to select him. JJ McCarthy, though, is different. Yeah, he had a decent combine, and his numbers made a sizable jump from last year's to this one, but none of those were as massive as a shift as AR-15 breaking, again, virtually every quarterback record at the combine, or the statistical turnaround that Zach provided. So what happened? How did the drastic turnaround occur? Where did this bizarre change come from? And why was McCarthy suddenly viewed as a top 15? No. Top 10? No. Top 5? No, not even there. He was potentially viewed as a top 3 selection in the NFL draft. The strangest thing about McCarthy's meteoric rise was that it seemed to come out of nowhere. I wasn't even really in tune when it happened. He just burst onto the scene. He was always perceived in the Bo Nix, Michael Penix range, and on very often occasion ranked lower than them. He was called Handoff JJ and was scoffed at the sheer thought of having the ability to perform at a high level. And majority of the NFL world agreed. He was mocked outside of the first round consistently and wasn't getting a lot of buzz around his name, which leaves the question of this: what caused it? Well, there are two likely scenarios that caused the shift. One, teams changed their tune and realized that they've been underrating him. Now, in theory, this could be the case, but it doesn't happen that often, at least in the case of JJ McCarthy. Without some major shift, like AR-15's historic combine, NFL offices don't usually change tune like they did. Two, front offices were always high on him, and the media didn't pick up on it until draft day grew closer. What do I think it was? A bit of both. Yeah, I'm fence riding. I think NFL teams have always liked JJ McCarthy, even though a lot of fans didn't. The amount of times he handed off the ball and his seeming lack of impact on the Michigan O, they did not fuck with him at all, regardless of the numbers. The Jimmy Garoppolo allegations were bombarded to him. I think NFL teams would see him a lot differently. Really good athleticism, really nice processing, and a pretty good arm, while being very young too. A lot of the teams would be higher on him than the fans and the media thought. I think he was already above guys like Penix and Nix for months on end. They had him higher than the media and definitely higher than a lot of fans had. But then, why did he catapult up? Yes, his jump into the top 5 range was certainly smaller than the one we initially thought at the beginning of the vid, but it's definitely sizable enough to raise some eyebrows. So what could be the reason for this? Well, I have just the theory for that: his combine performance. Now, you may be thinking, wait, didn't you say his combine performance wasn't close enough to catapult him to top 3 discussion? Yeah, I did, and I was right. I'm positive that his on-the-field performance during the combine didn't result in this implosion. I think it was some things behind the scenes. At the NFL combine, JJ McCarthy met up with 11 teams. He met with the Chicago Bears, Washington Commanders, New England Patriots, New York Giants, Atlanta Falcons, Minnesota Vikings, Denver Broncos, Las Vegas Raiders, New Orleans Saints, Seattle Seahawks, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Obviously, what happened in these meetings aren't public information, but if I had to infer, I would think that McCarthy's IQ and processing ability blew many franchises away. Now, obviously, they knew of his high intellect prior to the meeting, just due to his tape, but I'd have to assume that he drew things up on the whiteboard that had them festering for him. Another strange attribute is how he's viewed as a player. Despite him falling into more of that accurate intellectual archetype, he's still considered a project quarterback, something which for the average NFL fan would be befuddling. How the hell is JJ McCarthy or any one of his archetype potential high enough pick to warrant a top 5 or in some cases top 3 pick without the overwhelming talent that the project guys usually possess? Well, if I had to guess, and from my personal assessment, he didn't get the nickname Handoff JJ for no reason. In classic Jim Harbaugh fashion, Michigan ran a very run-heavy system, where JJ McCarthy not only had a run-heavy scheme to lean on, but a good run-heavy scheme. NFL teams see JJ JJ as a sure thing, even though he's a project. A bizarre concept, I know. They think his tools are there and he has a straight path to becoming at least a respectable starter in this league. Yeah, he may have some growth to do, but it's different between him and your average freakishly talented role player. A guy like Joe Milton or Jaden Daniels will take a lot of concentrated restructuring of tendencies, mechanics, or form. McCarthy doesn't need that extensive work. He's super advanced for his age to a point where any decent guidance would go a long way. We don't usually see this in project quarterbacks. Since high IQ is a developmental trait, having the ability of that coming off the draft, the naked eye must mean you hit your ceiling. I mean, obviously so, right? Well, the way JJ McCarthy is treated and projected defies that narrative entirely. JJ has a super high ceiling, not just him as a player, but his IQ. He's one of the first guys that I've seen labeled high potential based on his processing. And it's true. I've sung his praises about how advanced he is for his age, how the supernatural feel for the game he has is so developed that they have to select it. And in theory, yes, IQ is a developmental trait. You can easily teach it, or can you? Can you teach having a high football IQ? If you can, then what's stopping the average draft schmo from being elite? And if you can't, then what separates those schmoes who turn elite? What separates Tom Brady and Brock Purdy from Kyle Loetta? How does JJ McCarthy dabble in these dynamics? What makes a quarterback truly elite? This is such a tough question to answer, and it touches upon territory that is a little complicated to respond to. I think that one of the most important aspects and an obvious factor is situation. There is no universe where someone in a bad situation is going to succeed, especially if they're a developmental piece. The guys I mentioned, extremely late round successful quarterbacks, had to be put in a good situation. Tom Brady played under the greatest coach of all time in Bill Belichick, and Purdy, well, you know how ridiculous of a situation Purdy is in. Kyle Loetta played on the Pat Shurmur-led Giants, who obviously don't stack up with the two. But still, of course you can't stick any guy in a good situation and expect that they become elite. And even though some surprised the world and do, they were picked down there for a reason. They lacked the physical talent and their intellect end up surpassing previous expectations. But how? Well, with Brady, the narrative was always he wanted it more than everyone. He would work as hard as he possibly could to perfect his craft, which, while cute, obviously didn't result in what we have now. I'm not saying that didn't help, but it wasn't the main driving force. There was something else there. Now, obviously, you don't have access to enough information to make a completely on-the-nose take. Not only am I not allowed near NFL practices, I don't have a time machine to view the intricacies of Tom Brady's development as a rookie. Is there a similarity between the two phenoms in McCarthy? Yeah, I think there is. I think they see McCarthy as a guy with processing potential, a guy who in the future, with correct development, could have incredible intellectual abilities. Well, that's not rare. Technically, every quarterback could have a football IQ of a zillion. Yeah, no. I think every single quarterback has a meter, where they're currently at and where they could be potentially based off of circumstances and their personal adjustments. A guy like Joe Milton would approximately look like this, while a guy like JJ McCarthy would look like this. There was something special about Brady. I don't know what it is. If it was his ability to adjust his preconceived habits, or if it was to intake information. He was special at something that wasn't measurable that transferred him into the quarterback he is today. There is potential with IQ, and it varies between the person. JJ is projected this high because of how he has evident processing features that would translate to the NFL, features that would easily grow. His chart is higher because his reach is so far. Based on youth and development, he has the time and ability to intake and adjust. JJ is so weird because we never really seen a guy of his caliber this highly touted. Yeah, there's been some shades of it, but never someone who's labeled as a project solely because of their IQ potential. It's a real thing, just not tangible, which is why some guys go under the radar. But as development and scouting and players increase and shifts, and GMs find new ways to evaluate guys or new things to look for, more of these guys will pop up. The bright glow would catch their eyes. This is the first time we're really seeing this archetype, but it won't be the last.